we have the vasomotor center and the medulla oblongata. Its job, exert sympathetic control. Therefore, take the information that you have gotten from our baro reflexes. Do you guys remember those located in the aorta and the carotids? Chemos, okay, basically carotids, remember those? All right. And then we have something else. The medullary ischemic reflex. What is that? Well, like I said, baro reflexes, check for pressure. Chemo, check for blood chemistry. They really do a lot of their effect to our respiratory system and adjust our breathing to affect our heart rate. One of the things, well, some of the things, they pay attention to oxygen, they pay attention to CO2, they pay attention to the pH. They want to make sure that we increase or decrease blood movement in effect of the pH. Adjust that pH. Keep it at roughly 7.45. This one I haven't mentioned. The medullary ischemic reflex. This is our brain. The brain is constantly monitoring its blood flow. Because of this, all right, anything that reduces perfusion of blood, movement of the blood through the brain tissues, the brain picks it up immediately. The brain will alter whatever is needed to meet the demand of its own tissues. So it's almost like it is with the glucose, because the only thing that the brain can use is the glucoses. What does the body do? The body tries to meet the demand of the glucoses. This time, the brain is going to be monitoring, and it's mostly based on the pH level, okay? And if it in any way is wrong, it will alter our heartbeat and our respiration to meet the demands for the blood flow. So medullary ischemic means if there's a decrease in the blood flow to the brain, anytime there's a decrease in blood flow to tissues, it's ischemia. So ischemic means death to the tissues. And trust me, we don't want that to happen to the brain. We don't want it to happen anywhere, but just saying, especially the brain.
You said decrease of flow to the tissue, though.
Mm-hmm. The third way that we're going to have control is through hormones. Some of the hormones that we have, they can affect our blood pressure. Some can affect the vasodilation and constriction. So the vasoactivity of the vessels, and some of the hormones regulate water balance, which will affect the heartbeat. One that we're going to see when we get to the respiratory system is angiotensin and aldosterone. Angiotensin 2 is a hormone that is going to be very potent for blood pressure. And it wants to raise the blood pressure. It does not want to lower it. Aldosterone is another one. Do you guys remember that from the cortex of the adrenal gland? We had the zonas. Okay, this was one of the hormones from the adrenal gland, but the cortex of the adrenal gland. It also wants to raise blood pressure. And it's going to do that by acting on the kidneys. So we're going to see that in chapter 23. Our heart releases hormones. They're called natriuretic peptides. They will antagonize aldosterone and basically say, affect the kidneys, reduce my blood volume, and therefore lower my pressure. So these are all hormones that the body will use. Antidiuretic hormone. Do you remember that? From the endocrine system? It was one of the two hormones located in the posterior pituitary. So it's a neuroendocrine hormone because that's nervous tissue. Antidiuretic hormone makes the body hold on to water and therefore raise blood pressure. What about these two? Epi and norepi. How do we know these?
Fight or flight.
Adrenaline. Okay? Raise our blood pressure, stimulate vasoconstriction to the outer portions of the, to certain areas of the body, increase blood flow to my myocardium, increase blood flow to my skeletal muscles. So those can be hormonal ways we control blood pressure. They do not have to be active at all times. Some of these only activate in certain times of problems with the body. Now, once we get the blood to the capillary level, remember, this is our business end. This is where we make exchange. The capillaries are said to have two-way movement because we're going to have movement out at the arterial end and in at the venous end of the capillary. We need to make sure that we move oxygen, glucose, nutrients, antibodies, and hormones to our tissues. And in return, pick up carbon dioxide, waste, and some of the substances that have to be gotten rid of from the drop-off. I've already mentioned how we have that ability. Do you guys remember that we have the fenestrated capillaries? We're going to have intercellular clefts that can exist in those capillaries, and then our cytoplasm of the cells. So you guys remember when I drew like the tiny spaces a little bit bigger to the biggest? Okay, those are our routes of exchange. Now, what is my mechanism of the movement? Any of these terms look familiar? Diffusion, filtration, reabsorption. Well, what's the transcytosis? Take your term apart.
Cell.
Cytosis, something in the cell. What is trans? Move. Move it across the cell. Transcytosis. So, I can have something get diffused, I can have something move across the cell, I can have something filter, and I can then reabsorb something. Those are the ways that I can have the movement of my materials. At this point, I will not discuss diffusion. Hopefully you know it's from the area of high to low concentration. The transcytosis, movement across the cell. The cells can pick up material on one side of their plasma membrane, usually by pinocytosis or receptor-mediated endocytosis. So if I have a cell, all right, and there's a particle out here in the fluid, I can either have the pinocytosis. Do you remember what that means? Pino means to drink. So cell drinking. That cell can simply drink in that particular particle. But what is this receptor mediated?
I'm sorry, what was it?
What does it mean to be receptor mediated?
Those receptors are made.
It's controlling the...
I'm going to have receptors on my plasma membrane, and if the particles are out here and they can fit into my receptor, they will fit into the receptor, and the plasma membrane will simply form around it and bring it in. And so now the little particles, once this begins to fold in and bring them in, the particles are now inside my cell for usage. So if I bring in a particle on one side of my cell, it can travel to the other side and move out. And it can therefore go, like if this is in my extracellular fluid, okay, and it brought it in and pushed it across the cell, it'll release it on this side of the cell. It's just moving a particle across the cell. That's transcytosis. The filtration and reabsorption. The fluid filters out, moves out on the arterial end of the capillary, and re-enters on the venous side. It is based on hydrostatic pressure. Pressure of the water. That is what hydrostatic means. It is a force on the liquids from blood pressure in the capillaries. This is what it looks like for movement in the capillary beds. Your textbook is going to talk to you about all of these pressures. I'm going to simplify that for you. Arterial end, venous end. Now, if I look at my arterial end, okay, I will have a pressure in my tissues. I will have a pressure in my arterial side of this capillary bed. Is everybody with me?